In this module, you will learn how to configure platform-level security for Azure SQL. Hello, I am Cio Rodriguez. This module explains how to secure Azure SQL by strengthening identity, network, encryption, and data access controls. You'll learn how to configure Microsoft Entra ID authentication and disable SQL authentication to reduce password-based risks. You will also learn how to use private endpoints and firewall rules to isolate database access. For data protection, the module covers transparent data encryption or TDE and customer managed keys for regulated workloads. Finally, you apply dynamic data masking and row level security to control what sensitive information users can view. Together, these controls provide a layer security model for protecting Azure SQL workloads. Here we are at the Azure portal, portal.azure.com. As always, you can just search for SQL Server here, but since I already have it here, so we can click on this. And we're looking at the logical servers at this time. And here is our server. And specifically, we are going to look at, first of all, let's look at identity. But when you come to the page, here you get essentials information about the server, uh, the resource group, the status, the location, subscription, and all relevant information. Some networking components, and you can see at a glance some of the most important security stuff, whether the Microsoft Entra admin was configured or not. And so this allows you to centrally manage identity and access to your Azure SQL databases. And that's what one of the main features we're discussing, rather than having people log in with SQL identities, you use Microsoft Entra because Microsoft Entra supports MFA. But if you just log into the server using the SQL identity, there's no MFA. And in a modern cloud environment, you do want to use Microsoft Entra to log into your servers. And this is extremely important for the exam. You will definitely be tested on this. Okay. We see that auditing is not configured, and auditing will track database events and write them to an audit log in your Azure storage. And this is another important piece for the exam as well. You can configure Microsoft Defender for SQL. That's going to be another module. We're not going to be covering that, but that's not configured yet. This will help with vulnerability assessment and advanced threat protection to your SQL service and databases. Failover groups automatically manages replication, connectivity, and failover for a set of databases. That's not configured either. Automatic tuning, transparent data encryption is configured. So encryption at rest for your databases, backups, and logs. So rather than, yes, you could encrypt individual databases, but if you do at the server level, then any database that you create will be encrypted. So So here you see all those, these are divided into security, performance and recovery. But if you want to see them all together, you can click on all. But anyway, so that's the um, an overview of the security of this server. Now, if we were to, again, if we go to identity uh, in the zero trust framework mindset, identity is the new perimeter. This is where you want to start. If you want to start with zero trust, you start with identity. Okay, there are many components to zero trust and there are hundreds of controls, but start with identity. Just start there. It's impossible. Zero trust is a journey, and it's a journey that almost never ends. But even when you think that everything is in place, there's stuff that you need to be monitoring and configuring in a constant basis because things change, technology change, and um, requirements change. But zero trust is a long journey, and many people get overwhelmed. They don't know where to start, so start with identity. That being said, um, we're going to talk about there's this concept of system assigned managed identity and user assigned managed identity. These are two very important concepts for the exam. Okay, a system assigned managed identity enables Azure resources to authenticate to cloud services, for example, Azure Key Vault, without storing credentials in code. Once enabled, all the necessary permissions can be granted via Azure role-based access controls. And the life cycle of this type of managed identity is tied to the life cycle of this resource. What that means is that if you have a VM or a key vault with system assigned managed identity, when you remove that resource, the managed identity is also removed. So you don't have to, you know, come back and again, this is a very important point for the exam. Keep that in mind. You will be tested about this. Additional, each resource, for example, let's say virtual machines, can only have one system um, assigned managed identity. This is another uh, key point there. The start, well, it's off. So if you want to turn it on, then you would turn it on for this, but it is off. On the other hand, user assigned managed identity. So this kind of identities enable Azure resources to authenticate to cloud services. Again, Azure Key Vault without storing credentials in code, same as the system assigned managed identity. But this type of managed identities are created as standalone Azure resources, and they have their own life cycle. A single resource, let's say a virtual machine, can utilize multiple user assigned managed identity. And similarly, a single user assigned managed identity can be shared across multiple resources, like virtual machines. So what this means is that if you have several virtual machines and using a user assigned managed identity is it's good because you can use just one for all of them rather than having to use each one. But each of these are managed separately. So if you delete the virtual machine or the key vault, uh, and you're not going to use this user managed identity anymore, then you need to come back in and do that. And then you can click on this to add those managed identities if you wanted to do that. All right. When it comes to the primary identity, so when one or more user assigned managed identities, when they are assigned to the server, designate one of those as the primary or the default identity. So yes, you could have, system assign, user assign, but you want it's the primary, and you would choose that over here. Okay. Federated client identity, it's mainly used for cross-tenant resources, such as using a customer managed key from a key vault in another Microsoft Entra tenant, let's say like a partner or a company that has more than one tenant. You may select a federated client identity to use with the selected managed identity. And again, so you would configure that right over here. So those are the main components. Let's go back into our module um, that we are looking up today. And so basically we are here at the configure platform level security for Azure SQL. And the first objective is configure Microsoft Entra ID authentication and disable the SQL authentication on Azure. As soon as you, so there's a toggle that says Microsoft Entra only authentication, then the SQL authentication is disabled there. So let's take a look at the uh, configure authentication. This is where we were discussing. And as I said before, modern cloud applications require identity-based authentication to eliminate password sprawl and enforce multi-factor authentication. In this case, our company, Contoso Financial Services, discovered that their AI fraud detection service uses SQL authentication with a shared password stored in a configuration file. And this sounds like you would say, why would you do that? This is more common than what many people think, even though we have always discussed the fact that you shouldn't share password, but it is so easy to share a password, and sometimes IT departments, and believe me, I have been in IT for many years, and yes, this happens a lot. Not just in SQL, but in all kinds of things. You know, uh, passwords are shared. Period. Uh, which is a security risk identified during their security review in this company. So before, basically, you have an Azure function, for example, that needed to use an SQL using an SQL password. There was no Microsoft Entra ID. And so you couldn't use MFA. Now, of course, Azure function cannot use MFA, and this is where you would use either a system assign or a user assign identity. So those system assign and or user assign identities are for all the resources that need to have access to, in this case, a database. Okay. Now, this would create the password sprawl risk that we are discussing. Share credentials because one breach exposes all those services. After we made those changes, then we have an Azure function that would get a token from Microsoft Entra ID. There's no passwords. MFA is enforced. Again, if a user is signing in, uh, but you would use the system assign identity for an application, and then you get these auto token rotation. So again, yeah, system assign manage identity lifecycle tied to the resource. We talked about that as well. Okay, and so configuration step again, set Microsoft Entra admin. This is really important. You need to set this up because if you don't set this up first, then if you disable SQL access and you don't have the Microsoft Entra admin set up, then you would lose access to that. So you you should assign a user or a group as the Microsoft Entra administrator. Okay. Enable Entra only OAuth. So disable SQL Server authentication at the server level. We discussed that. Um, and you should create contain users. Basically map Microsoft Entra identities or manage identities to database users. And then you should grant permissions, assign roles using um, a standard T SQL grant statements and that kind of stuff. Okay. So we talked about this, and there's also we're using the GUI, but those of you who are proficient using um, the CLI, obviously, a lot of admins prefer that, people with a lot of experience. But a lot of useful stuff over here on this module. Very important for the exam is the use of, there are many questions in the exam about using the right role, the concept of uh, least privilege, which is one of the basic component of a zero trust mindset, right? So in terms of SQL, you have the SQL Security Manager, which is used basically for security policies, no database management, no data access. Then you have the SQL Server Contributor, which and it's only for database management. Okay, and then you have the SQL DB Contributor, which is for database only. So depending on the questions, make sure to keep this in mind because you will definitely get questions about that. Right. The next unit, it's implement network isolation. Let's go back into our environment, and now let's go into the network component. We're not going to save anything there. So first of all, public network access. This is what we are talking about. Depending on the database, if you're going to use a database internally, of course, you do not want to have public network access. It's all depending in the case, but um, public endpoints allow access to this resource through the internet using a public IP address. That's, in a nutshell, that's what it means. An application or resource that is granted access with the following network rules still requires proper authentication to access this resource, right? So um, if you want to select a specific networks, and this is where the Azure, the firewall comes in. There's a lot of networking over here, as we have discussed. So you can create virtual networks to allow virtual networks to connect to your resource using private endpoints. So private endpoints, again, is huge when it comes to security. And then you would create a virtual network rule right here, and you would also create firewall rules and exceptions and add the subnets and stuff. There's a lot of stuff here for the network folks in normally the network people in an environment would do this as a security admin. Your job is to make sure that the security components are in place. But anyway, so um, that's where you would configure those things. And then here we have the private access component that we're talking about. You would create your endpoint, you know, here, follow the instructions, and it's another resource that you need to create. But anyway, that's where um, you would do that. And in terms of connectivity, this is for you have outbound connectivity This will restrict network access to a specific set of resources by supplying their fully qualified domain name, this case, and that's configured over here. In terms of connectivity, you here can configure how clients communicate with your SQL database server. The default is that users redirect policy for all client connections originating inside of Azure, except private endpoint connections, and a proxy for all client connections originating outside Azure. This is another point really important for the exam. You will get questions about this. So take a note, take a screenshot, study this because definitely you're gonna get questions about this. Okay. So proxy, again, all connections are proxy via the Azure SQL database gateways. Redirect, client establish connections directly to the node hosting the database. Okay. And the encryption in transit. So this server supports encrypted connections using transport layer connection or TLS. Any login attempts from clients using a TLS version less than the minimum TLS version shall be rejected. And again, the minimum is TLS 1.2. Notice that you cannot even choose the older versions here at all. Okay, so those are the main components when it comes to network isolation. So in this case, um, Contoso Financial Services run Azure SQL database for transaction processing and SQL managed instance for a credit risk assessment. Both services currently expose public endpoints to the internet. The AI fraud detection service and internal banking applications run in Azure Virtual Networks or VNets, and on-premises banking systems connect through ExpressRoute. The security team must eliminate public internet exposure while maintaining access for Azure hosted workloads and on-premises systems. So, and we've seen this before. Well, sort of. So, before public endpoint was exposed, as we saw in the portal, and after the configuration, then when you use private endpoint, then internet access is disabled. That's what this is about. Okay, and so again, talking about this, a lot of more reading here if you want to, but in a nutshell, that's what this is all about, and what you need to at least to pass the exam and understand the security aspects of this. In Unit 4, encrypt and protect data in transit and at rest. TDE. So let's go back into the portal and let's take a look at encryption. So specifically, so here we're talking about the transport data encryptions, which encrypts your databases, the backups, and the logs at rest without any changes to your application. To enable encryption, go to each database. You can do that. Um, you have two choices: encryption, the TDE, transparent data encryption. You can use either a service managed key or use your own key stored in Azure Key Vault, and that's what you would choose over there. So those are the main pieces. Now, if you want to go into the database and look at the um, encryption, I don't even think we have a any database at all. But let's go back here and yeah. So there's no databases, but if we SQL database free offer, okay, let's take a look at this to see the kind of things. So you would choose your obviously subscription and resource group to create this, and the database name, the SQL name, etc. So that's what you would do there, and then you would create it. There's not much over here to do. Okay, so if you want to do some advanced configuration, now the free tier may not have uh, much stuff to do. Let me go back and go into databases. Yeah, so you get a lot more features over here um, when you choose a paid tiered over here, right? So the database name, and want to use elastic pool, blah, blah. We're just going to concentrate and look at the different, well, there's nothing here. It's the typical stuff, regions, but um, we want to look at, in terms of networking, allow Azure services and resources to access this server. This is important over here, right? Because, and these are the little things that will get you on an exam. And that's why this type of exams is very difficult, because you may get a screenshot or you may ask a question about something like this. If you've never seen this, if you've never done it, it's very difficult to pass this exam. This is not a typical multiple choice exam. It's not only multiple choices that are, I mean, you get the multiple choice, but based on something, a scenario or a screenshot. And if you don't pay attention to these little details, you're not going to pass. So be careful with that. Our current IP address, blah, 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 connectivity. In terms of security for this database, let's see. Um, so here we have the, in terms of security, well, of course, the server identity, we discussed that, but always encrypted. Always encrypted is a family of industry leading data protection features that provide a separation between those who own the data and can view it and those who manage the data but uh, should have no access. Um, On-premises database administrators, cloud database operators, or the high privilege uh, but authorized users. So, and this is what, just because you are an administrator of a database, it doesn't mean that you have permission to see the content of the database, the clients and stuff like that. So, and this is what this is about. So, if you want to do that, then enable secure enclaves, then you would turn that on. So, that's a really important piece there. All right. And the other stuff, it's not related to security, so we're not even going to get there. All right. Just wanted to go over that. So, if we go back into the the guide, transparent data encryption (TDE) is enabled by default on all Azure SQL databases, protecting data files, logs, and backups at rest using service managed keys. While this approach provides a strong encryption without configuration overhead, financial regulators require controls of financial services to control encryption keys for databases containing financial personal data. So, who manages the key? It's either Microsoft or you as the customer. That's the whole point here. So, TDE key should be, in this case, it's the company. It's a requirement, and a lot of these standards, like the ISO 27001 in NIST, they require that the customer manage this kind of keys. Okay, and so if you have Azure Vault, this would be an RSA key, CMK. It's a 48-bit or 3072-bit asymmetric, and it's controlled by the organization. Okay, and they should be soft delete and purge protected. Important there's too. Okay, database encryption key, or DEK. It's an AES 256 symmetric key, encrypted arrest using CMK. And then decrypting memory only when the data is accessed. And again, these are little details that you need to know because you may get questions that will ask you about this. Okay. And we talked about the protected data, the always encrypted component. We just saw how to do that. All right. So the SQL Server authentication path, we got manage identity. It would get the key from Entra, go to Key Vault, and again, do whatever you need to do, and then you could block access as well. The encryption layer, it's, key control, service manage is Microsoft, customer manage is the organization. When it comes to key rotation, the service manage is automatic. The customer is either manual, or you could also automate this. In terms of compliance support, it's basic. That's why if you need to comply with service managed basic compliance, but if you need a strong compliance, as I said, like the ISO 27001, this is a regulatory compliance. You have to do the customer manage, and this is why normally when you get a question about this, it's going to be customer managed, and you know, uh, make sure you understand that. Configuration complexity, the service managed was is none because it's managed by Microsoft. You don't have to do anything. This is a little bit more, there's certain decisions you need to take, and that's it's there. All right, so more information here. Um, the steps that you need to do this. So if you want to come back, and we talked about this secure data in transit with the TLS, and remember the minimum is 1.2. You cannot even choose anything else. Always encrypted. We talked about this. Um, Now, when do you choose which, right? Protects against disk theft. TD alone would do that, yes. Always encrypted, yes. Protects against DBA access. So, do you want the administrator? So, TD alone does not protect against that. Always encrypted does. So, if the question says, like, you want to protect um, the DBA from accessing, then you need to use always encrypted. Protect against Azure personnel. Again, similar to this one. Application changes required. Again, the same thing. Query complexity challenge, non high, and again. So again, and here is a graphic that would give you more insight into how this works. All right. The last unit on this module, apply data masking and row level security. So even the people, so protecting sensitive data requires multiple layers of access control. Consortium Financial Services has customer service representatives who need to view account information but must not see the full credit card numbers or your social security number. So when you call any of these companies, whether it's Verizon, AT&T, and one of those customer reps access your account, that's why they ask you the last number, the last four of your social security number. They don't have access to the full number for security, and that's accomplished during dynamic data masking. Okay, and this is done in the I don't think you can do that at the server level, but if we go to, well, I don't have the database there, but let's go to, let's see, we don't have any instance here either. So let's go back to the server, and let's see. So we got security, data management, and settings. This is the Microsoft Entra ID. We talked about this. Setting the set admin right there. SQL databases. We don't have any. Um, okay, transparent data encryption. We talked about that. Um, yeah, so you would have to go into the database itself to manage the. We're going to get back to that when you get into the databases, but that's basically what that it's about. There's nothing there for me to show you. Um, all right. Anyway, so here's more information about this. Um, what are detected sensitive columns? Use the portal to identify candidate field for masking. Yeah, we'll take a look at that at some other later on. Azure SQL supports 6 masking functions, and these are the kind of functions that you may get a question that to identify which kind of function it's using. The so the default is 0 for numbers and the last 4 for the strings, right? For general purpose stuff. Now, for email, it would be something like this: partial email visibility. So the email, maybe you've seen this when you go to log into certain accounts where you basically see, like, especially when you are changing your password, you forget your password, and they ask you, well, this is the email that you use, and you'll see something like that. At least it gives you a cue, a tip of what your email was. But these are the masking function, and they're self-explanatory, to be honest with you. So if you get a question, you should be able to figure that out. But SQL statements and stuff, and I don't think there's much of this that you need to pass the exam. But if you are uh, a DB or something like that, of course, this is a lot of information there for you to manage. There you have it. So we went through um, networking, right? And the private endpoint. Actually, so if we go back into, if we look at as always, remember to come in and take the knowledge check quiz. Um, but in this module, we configure 4 platform level security layers for Azure SQL database and SQL managed instances. We just looked at the SQL database server, not the managed instance. You implemented Microsoft Entra ID. As a matter of fact, this will give me an idea. So if we go to um, the SQL server, well, yeah, not having the SQL. No, we'll come back to that. But anyway, so you isolated database access through private endpoints and disable public network access. You also configure transparent data encryption with customer managed keys, and Azure Key Vault enforce transport layer security TLS. You don't need to do that. A lot of the stuff over here, well, that's the default, and you cannot even use anything else. So there's nothing for you. The funny thing is that you may get a requirement and an auditor may go over there, oh, I want to see that you have TLS. Well, that's the only thing I can have, but they want to see that. So you need to go as a cybersecurity administrator, you need to be able to at least produce that for an audit, right? Explore always encrypted for protecting sensitive data from privileged users. And finally, you apply dynamic data masking. Well, we didn't actually do this, but it's something that you need to know about, and there's a lot of information there. This is to protect sensitive fields and configure role level security to enforce division based data isolation. So that's what we went through. Um, and so we are in, where are we? This is actually, let's come here. This is the entire um, certification, and if this is the first time that you are watching this, then we have discussed that this is divided into courses or learning paths. There are 12 learning paths in this certification. This is a very long certification. So a lot of stuff. And so we are in learning path number 5. We have covered all those learning paths already. So if you want to take this certification, you have some homework to do. Just go to my channel and watch those videos. And leave me a comment. Make sure that I improve this every time. Really appreciate those comments. I really want to create a community where we can share ideas. I am not an expert on everything, of course. I'm not a DBA. I'm not a network administrator. I have all the basic knowledge of some of those components, but um, I know what needs to be configured from the security perspective, and that's what the whole point of this is. So if I'm missing on something, please let me know. If we are we are in this learning path, okay, and so this learning path, as all, they are divided into modules, and this is the first module in this learning path. Configure platform level security. That's what we just did. In the next, we're going to configure auditing for Azure SQL database and SQL managed instances. That's what we're going to be looking at, specifically at the databases themselves. We just looked at the server, but then we're going to come back and look at the databases and see all the configuration that can be done, including the data masking that we were talking about. So there's a lot of to that. So that's going to be the next module. And then after that is implement Microsoft Defender for databases. Um, this is the instance databases, and this is implementing the databases themselves. And that's it. So those are the three modules in this learning path, which is learning path uh, 5 out of 12. So um, a long way to go. And as always, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next.